All right, thanks for joining us here this afternoon for this talk here. So we're going to get into what we're going to go over today: 777X, program management analytics, and we're going to talk about how Boeing is powering our second century with actionable insights. And so, kind of show of hands to start out with, how many people are actually here from Boeing? Because I think we've got a pretty safe house here. There you go. That's good. So for us, it's Boeing is making a real investment in Tableau and making a real investment in how we're using data to solve problems. And so it's good for us to see such a strong contingent here. So my name is Paul Ortman. I'm the Senior Manager in Business Operations. I lead what's called the Program Management Analytics team, which includes Senior Analysts Richie Stahl, raise your hand, and Sean Chrisman, raise your hand.
Raise your hand.
A lot of people get these guys confused because they look exactly the same. So. So we're here to talk about how we're using Tableau to specifically get actionable insights into Boeing's business. A little bit about my background with Tableau. I go back about 5-6 years with Tableau. I had a little team in manufacturing and quality, which there's some folks here that I used to work with back then, manufacturing and quality at Boeing. And we had 3 or 4 analysts and 1 server, and we pushed insights out to about 200 or 300 people, which felt like a lot at the time. And today, we've got 5 individual server instances, and we're pushing to 2,000-3,000 users a day. And that includes desktop through server. We get out to even our CEO's telephone. So we've really teased out what we could potentially do with this tool. So we get into kind of how we get into our Tableau journey today and what we're doing with it. I'd like to maybe to reflect upon some of the things you could maybe do in your own business to tease out what you think the art of the possible is. So as we move on, really what we're going to go through today is just a couple things. So we're going to go through what's the Program Management Analytics tool. We call it PMAT. So if we slip up and start going into Boeing acronym talk, which is what we tend to do, just know that's what we're talking about. So Program Management Analytics tool. We're going to break that out into a couple pieces. The first piece is going to be behaviors and culture, and then scenarios and demo. So the first part of what we're going to do today, you're going to get to listen to me talk through PowerPoint, which is how we really embrace data, is right with PowerPoint. And then we're going to get into a scenario where we're actually going to do a live demo. And so Richie and Sean are going to go through how we use our tools to run a business plan review meeting. And so when we think about behaviors and culture, Boeing's a 100-year-old company. We're actually 102 years old. So Tableau has not been around for 102 years. The concept of data has not been around for 102 years, unless you're talking about stone tablets for the most part, right? So we have a large culture shift that we need to make. And so adoption is a big deal for us. And so when we get into how we actually bridge the gap from 1916 to 2018, we have a lot of ground that we have to make up, and we have a lot of behaviors we have to address. Then we're going to get into a scenario and demo, and we're going to show you how the actual tools work. And then at the very end, we'll have a panel Q&A. So anytime we have left, you can ask us about why we did what we did, how we did it, and then where we're going next. So a brief history of Boeing. So most of us, if we're doing our jobs really, really well, we're looking not just where we are today, but we're looking out the distance. So Boeing Commercial, which is where we work, has a 20-year forecast. And so when we look at our global forecast, we anticipate somewhere in the neighborhood of 41,000 delivered aircraft in the next 20 years, which is an incredible amount of product. And so when we take a look at what we've got roughly $6.1 trillion market value. Middle breaks out roughly where we sell our products, and you can see Asia Pacific is one of our biggest opportunities based off of how many deliveries we expect. We look down on the bottom. This is really our family. So if you were to go home and you were to look at your family, a picture of your family on the wall, they hopefully wouldn't look like that. But this is what our family looks like, and we've got regional jets up to freighters. Where we live is in this little box here called the 777X. And the 777X for us has roughly a $1.12 trillion market in the next 20 years. And so we start thinking about how can we really tease out value out of a program. there's a real compelling reason for us to really understand what all of our data can do for us. One of the pieces about kind of where we've been at Boeing, too, to consider, if we look on the box just to the left of that is the 787. How many people remember the 787 when it launched? It was a really big deal for us. So it was 2007. So when I think back to 2007, it doesn't really feel like that long ago, even though I didn't have children then, and now I have kids terrorizing me every day. But 2007 was the birth of iPhone 1. Does anybody remember that? Twitter came out in 2007. Start thinking about the way the world has changed in 10 years. I mean, IoT. We just bought a new fridge at home, and it's Bluetooth refrigerator. I still have no idea why I would ever want to Bluetooth my refrigerator. I don't know what I would do with it. But even when Boeing is looking at going from 1916 to 2018, even the jump from 2007 to 2018, 10 years or more, is actually a pretty large leap for us. So you can think of what's happened in 10 years technologically and what we have to contend with. So when we start thinking about technology, there's an analogy I'd like to kind of spread out over the audience. This is going to be one of the themes we talk about today. So what I put up there in the glory of PowerPoint and all my mastery of how to make a gray box is, this is supposed to be a city block. And so what I would like you to do is think about that as a city block. And a city block for us is really not too uncommon for the way we would approach a brand new airplane program, right? A brand new airplane program, kind of like a city block, is just a big idea. What are we going to go do with this block? So the first thing we do when we're thinking about coming up with a new product that we're going to bring to market is we put a building on the city block. And for us, it's sales and marketing. And so the way we think about sales and marketing is we might have a few thousand people that go to work in this building. And so you see the city block, and we have one building. And all these folks do is they go in there, and they're trying to figure out if we can offer a product to the market that the market's going to respond to. So these folks go to work every day, and they have a certain key card, and they work with a certain type of data. So once they come up with a compelling vision for a new airplane, we go ahead and we have to actually design and build this airplane, right? So the first thing we do is we have to engineer it. So it's one thing for the marketing folks to conceive of a brand new airplane. It's another thing for us to engineer it. So now we start building out this city block, and you see we just plop another building down somewhere, and that's engineering. So when we think of engineering, we're thinking thousands of people that are showing up into this building to design an airplane. Totally different data sets, totally different folks. None of these people talk to each other for the most part. As soon as we get engineers, now we have to figure out how to pay for engineers, right? So it's one thing for us to conceive of a product. Now we have to actually pay engineers, and that's where finance comes along. Finance is yet a third group of employees that are not in sales and marketing and not in engineering. So now we have a third group of folks that are using a different key badge to go up to the top of a tower. Kind of follow where I'm going here. A totally different set of data. And this is where we really start to think about how Tableau brings the building together or brings a city together. So once we have finance, now we have schedule. So we work in program management. Program management does the scheduling and does the risk baselines for the program. So once we start to engineer a product, we need to have a schedule. We have to have set deliverables. We have customers that expect us to come home with a product on time. Okay, so we schedule the engineering, we schedule these supply chain tasks. Risks are a part of life. We just need to make sure that we're going to retire risk. So we have schedule, risk, and sons. That's the building that we plop down. Fourth group of folks that show up to work with different data. Now we start getting into where you need supply chain, because we have to actually have a supply chain. We have health and safety, different group of folks. We need to make sure the product is safe to build. We also then get into factory operations. That's where we have some of our folks here from our industrial engineering group, our IEs. We start thinking about, hey, this is a great product. How are we going to go build this? Then we get into quality control. Once we build it, now we have quality, another group of folks, and so on and so forth, until we get down to IT. And we start thinking all the different tools we're going to do to bring it together. So if you take a look at this, it's this black and white masterpiece of buildings that have just been thrown on a city block. And this really isn't too dissimilar from how we would do a program. There's nothing necessarily bad about it or wrong about it, but all these folks go to work in different buildings, and so if we're trying to tease out what the health of the entire program is, it's pretty tricky to do it. So along comes Sean and Richie and myself, and we got together and we talked about how could we start blending the data pieces together so we could understand the overall health of the program. So we float ourselves in above there like a spaceship, and we make our first pull. So since we were in program management, the easiest place for us to go was schedule data. So we grabbed onto schedule data. We get finance data next, and we start blending these pieces together to see if there's anything that makes sense. We add engineering data and then supply chain and health and safety. We get into some of the factory operations data, right? All the way until we have this, what looks like an alien spaceship ready to take over the world. Anybody seen War of the Worlds? This looks like the War of the Worlds ship to me. Okay, so we kind of had a decision to make. Either we're going to take over the world or else we're going to do some analytics. So we did analytics, which is good for everybody. So what it turns into for us is once we were able to normalize those data sets and start to understand the push and pull of schedule and finance and risks, we really started to pipe the buildings through with a common layer, and that common language was data, right? So that's where you see the buildings start to align a little bit better, and you see these pipelines go through there. And that's really the insight that we were able to pump into the business. And by doing this, the actual buildings, since the folks in quality typically don't go into the IT building, now those buildings can talk to each other. So moving on from the analogy to exactly what we're going to show today, this is where if you really like to squint at charts, this is your wheelhouse right here, right? I thought about making them smaller just so you could get more practice, but so the 777-9 Program Management Analytics Tool. So we know what Tableau does for us is really, really well. Tableau allows us to use visuals to connect customers with data, right? The most compelling visual for us is the airplane because we all work for the airplane. The airplane is our boss. So we center everything around the airplane, and this is our navigation portal. So Richie and Sean are going to go through how we use this portal, but this is how we start to present for the customer, which is our vice president, some of our senior management group, our management, even down to the floor level of the folks that are actually doing the real work. We show them kind of a choose your own adventure, and we give them 4 choices. We have an overall business health, which is an amalgamated data set where we look at the actual program health, and we look at 3 slices of data underneath that. So we have schedule insight, Rio management. Rio for us is risk, issue, and opportunity, and finance. So the first chart we're going to go through today is we're going to drill right through schedule insight. And what I want to kind of impart on you as we look at this today, we've used 3 personas and tried to bake 3 personas into every workbook and every dashboard that we build. Upper left-hand corner, we present something for the vice president or the executives on the program. So we want them to, we know that at least in America, we always read top to bottom, left to right. So we present something for them. It's typically one of our more higher level metrics. It's where we want them to look at maybe the entire program as a whole. It's our 40,000 foot level. Off to the right is where we start to maybe distill that down a little bit more, and that's where we get into some things that maybe some of our management staff really concerned about as they lead their teams. And then down in the very bottom here is where we see some of the working level data. We do the same thing in Rio management. Upper left-hand corner, we have a cumulative risk chart. And so Richie and Sean will go through how we actually build this and how we use it. But what this risk chart does for us is it shows us that compression of risk on a program. We were never able to visualize this before. So using Tableau, we're able to see how much pressure we actually have on the program in risk. It's kind of like if you ever went to college and you were not studying and you weren't studying and you weren't studying. This is kind of a visual of what it would look like for you to fret over the fact that you're not studying because you want to go down to Bourbon Street. So that's what this would look like. And again, there's a bunch of other charts that they're going to go through there. Third piece for us is we aggregate down finance data. And so finance, we use a pretty high-level sand chart, and we've got some prediction and some forecast in there. We're able to allow folks to look forward a little bit to see how the teams are progressing and what the performance could be. And then we also get down into the bottom. We get to see some of the team-level performance to tease out some of those triggers. And then as we aggregate those 3 pieces up, we're going to get into what's the overall business health. So overall business health for us is really where we put insight on one page at one point. And this is really where we drill down into the other three as we need to. So everything we're going to go into is fake data, right? So I think these things in red here say fake data. So if you want to take a screenshot, it's going to be perfectly fine. But again, we see this airplane image up here, and we've got donut charts that actually show the current health of the program. It's all objective, nothing is subjective here. So instead of a support staff of 100 to 200 people that have to make PowerPoint decks every week to tell executives how the business is doing, we let the data talk for how the program is doing. And that's what we do with this chart here. So if you're through with the PowerPoint, you could raise your hand and these guys can go into a demo. Does anybody want to see a live demo of the tool? Okay. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Sean and Richie now, and they're going to get into the demo. And really just want to throw it over to these guys and say that you know, it was their ingenuity that took something that we drew on a board 1.5 years ago and turned it into what you're going to see today.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So as Paul mentioned, the executive and senior leadership review that takes place on a weekly basis and team reviews that take place throughout the week starts with the business, overall business health. So Richie, why don't you click on the overall business health? So the overall business health dashboard consists of 3 different visuals. So these 3 visuals aggregate scores all from 3 different relational databases. And these 3 relational databases build scores, and these scores are scored similar to golf. So 1 is your low score, your good score, and a 10 is your bad score, with green representing the low scores and red representing the high scores. For this top visual on the left, we have donuts plotted on coordinates. And for this image here, like Paul was saying, we chose an airplane. We always try and marry up our data set to the ultimate product that we're producing when that opportunity is available to us. So each of these coordinates here, while they're fake teams, we would have each of the teams plotted on or near the asset that they support. The visualization in the top right is the aggregate health score for the entire program. So this overall health dashboard, like Paul was saying again, takes a look at schedule, takes a look at risks, issues, and opportunities, and takes a look at finance. And so how we aggregate those scores, how we build those scores, is generated by some of those details on the right. Across the bottom, we have a heat map. And for this example today, we're looking at July as today. July is probably right around the time we got approved to come and do this speech. So we're using July data. And as we can see there, we get the score for today, but we also get predicted scores out into the future. So as we're looking at team-by-team basis, we can understand what the overall health of a team today, but we can also predict where they're going to be months in the future. And Richie will be talking about this throughout this presentation in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So as we mentioned, the goal of a tool like this is really to provide that organic approach to a team meeting or a program meeting showing team performance, right? And so when we start with the upper left worksheet here, the goal is to really use that size and that color to draw the attention of the user to where there might be a reason for concern or further conversation, right? So we have our overall program performance right now at the current time in July over to the right, but we can see that same score broken down by teams along their bubbles here. And we chose donuts as well, right, to show that score is an aggregate of those 3 key areas: schedule, risk, and finance. And so we see the outer ring there. You see the kind of push-pull between the 3 categories, and really quickly you can see what category might be making up the largest portion of the team score. So looking at our example here, we see that Team J and Team B are definitely drawing my attention to them, the 2 big red bubbles in the middle. And so if we hover over Team J, we can use the viz in a tooltip to quickly see how their stoplight compares to the program overall, and get those same quick details off to the right of what's making up these scores, these 1 through 10 scores. And then it's also important to note that, like Sean was mentioning, we show this heat map along the bottom, right? Because this overall top left visual is at a month level, but it updates with the data. And so whatever latency the data is we're connected to, these scores are dynamic and change every day. For us, it's daily, so it will refresh overnight on server, and the leaders down to the working level can open this up and see how their scores are progressing. Rather than just being surprised when it opens, you get somewhat of a forward look here as to what we're showing within the data, and we'll discuss more the different types of data as we break them each down. What's making up those scores out in the future and which way we're trending. So right now we're looking at Team J and Team B, both red in the month of July. But down below we can also see that while they're high, right now it's more of a gradient of the green, yellow, red down below. Team B that I'm on right now is trending in the right direction pretty quickly, right? They're still red in August, but then they trend down to the way we want them to. Whereas Team J stays red for quite a while before they trend. And sometimes, things pop up in the future as well. So now that we're looking at Team J and their overall performance, we see that schedule is, as well as finance, is very high. And this is the way the meeting would go, right? The VP or the team leader even can say, I want to know more about the schedule, right? And so we can use our actions to go right to the schedule deck or the schedule overview page already filtered for Team J.
Yeah, so as we start filtering into each of these individual dashboards, we'll be looking at a single data source. So for the overall schedule health score, we're looking at on-time performance and future forecaster performance. And that's what will build up that aggregate health score. The visual on the top left, similar to the previous page, is our coordinates mapped on a background image. And this background image is your standard schedule chart, your schedule high-level milestone chart, with each of your teams lined up along the left-hand side and a couple years worth of data and some scattered milestones. In our business, this chart takes a ton of effort to update. So what we've done is, rather than having those coordinates be static, they're actually calculations that as the underlying data is updated, as a event moves out into the future or is brought forward, those coordinates on the x-axis will actually move. Another visual that we have here is size and color, much as we did on the previous page, to draw that eye to problem areas and start that conversation in the place where the conversation needs to start. On the right-hand side, we have schedule performance by week. Here we can see how many tasks we have, and in our case, tasks are usually engineering releases, where engineering is releasing an event to a supplier for them to procure the material and start to produce. And we can see events that have completed on time in green, events that have completed late in yellow, and events that that are currently delinquent in red. And what the orange is actually a dual axis where we've taken the baseline state of a schedule event and plotted out based on where they predict that they're going to be completing that task. So it gives an idea of how much capacity you're pushing out into the future. And then to accompany both of these visuals, we have all of the details. All of these details will filter down. On the 777X program, we have millions and millions of tasks. So this helps an individual team or an individual engineer or an individual analyst quickly filter down to the details that they need to understand and use them to validate both those metrics above.
Thanks, Sean. So we'll continue with the kind of team level scenario, right? We're in the meeting. We wanted to know more about Team J performance and schedule, and so we've now jumped to this page already filtered for Team J. When I say that, you see that the upper left image, this critical events chart that Sean was showing, actually does have all the other teams on it. Each team is a swim lane on here, and we do that by design. We didn't filter out the other teams on that one specific worksheet by design. And that's because being a high-level milestone chart like this, those are very important tasks to complete as they all roll up and support the airplane as a whole. We wanted to see how Team J's high-level milestones are interplaying with the other teams and how they're performing as well. If we look at this chart a little bit more, Sean was mentioning it takes a lot of time to manually update. This was that flat file that had a lot more writing on it before I had to scrub it all to be able to be the fake data that we're showing here. It has, title blocks, and they had to manually move little icons along the screen and update it, and leaders would wait till the end of the week to get the update of what happened all week long. Now, as it changes overnight, they quickly see what's going on in the underlying data based on what the engineers are putting in the system. And so if we look at these, like he mentioned, these are schedule releases, and our data is our schedule data is very integrated. The schedule releases all have relationship networks built in, and we have a relational database. And what we're showing here is the output of that, right? Is the color, as he mentioned, is very basic. It's straight, how is it performing? Is it on time? Is it late? On time would be that white color, nothing to be concerned of. But the size is really what's important on this chart because it uses that relational database which finds when the next predecessor before it, the soonest it can actually finish. And if that doesn't agree with the due date of a certain task, a disconnect is found, and it counts that disconnect and gives that to the size of the bubble. So if we take the example of one here on Team J, where the bubble's white, because according to the engineer here that owns this task, they put ECDs, or estimated completion dates, in the system. And that's when that engineer says he's going to be done, of 12/7, which matches the baseline, everything's fine, it's white. But the bubble's big, because right below that ECD you see an early finish, and that's that calculated date, finding the next predecessor before it, or some predecessor in its chain, sorry, isn't going to finish until 2020, which is 395 days, or manufacturing days of disconnect, according to this fake example of task 26991, right? And so right there we see that maybe engineers aren't discussing, and that can go across teams, that can go across functions, right? And so a high-level chart like this can quickly show that a very important milestone along Team J's path to the airplane has some discrepancy and needs to be discussed further, and that would definitely start the discussion on this page. As we move to the right, we see more of a team working level meeting. It is filtered for just Team J, and as Sean mentioned, this is workflow. This is showing what they have baselined and where it is right now. And so he mentioned it was a dual axis chart, and we do that because we wanted to show the same task in two different places, both where it was baselined and where it's currently going based on those ECDs, right? And so if we use a parameter, when you're looking at it beyond just Team J, it's nice to see it in these high-level buckets of performance, but we allow them to use a parameter to quickly show the details of what's making up those bars. These thin bars in front are the task where it was baselined, what we booked based on the budget we had, and what we said we can complete. But as Sean mentioned, yellow and red means it didn't complete as we thought it would. And so what we show is like a red task like this one. If you click it, you actually see that leapfrog from where it was here, and now it's actually moved all the way out to this month, and hovering will give you that quick detail that it was supposed to happen in April, and the current ECD on this task is June 6th. What's important about that leapfrog, or that bow wave, when you do any kind of schedule work or workflow management, is there was a certain budget out in this week of July 6th or July 11th, whatever this example is, that the owner of Team J thought he had and said, we baselined, if we look at this little bar here, about 15 tasks to complete that month. That might be restricted by his budget, but because of past performance, they've actually moved out all these other tasks, and they're over 40, or at 40 for the month. That orange bar behind it, all that work is bow waved out in front, and it gives them this team-level look. Are we setting ourselves up for failure? And it's just quick and visual, and that leapfrog motion is really what gets them thinking about just typing a number in the system saying, I'll be done in July. The engineer doesn't understand that, right? But when you can see what it does in the context of the whole team or the whole program, it makes quite the impact. Before we jump down, the last little bit we add in here is this reference line, which is an 8-week rolling average of what was completed in the past. So that gives them some context of, that's great, we have this big orange bar. Have we ever even been able to perform to that amount, right? And that reference line gives you that idea. Our schedule data, one great thing about it, right, is that it has tons of dimensions and ways to quickly slice down. And so while we start at this high-level view and looking at even a team level, we allow the user to quickly slice and dice the data down to even an individual team, certain release types down to the engineer right here on the same page. And we do show all the details here at the bottom, right? It's a common view that everyone in the Boeing company loves, this spreadsheet crosstab view, right? But what's nice about this is it proves out what's up above. You see exactly the records that are counted up each week and the raw data that's showing it in a more easy to understand for our customers format. And now that we've gone through kind of a schedule scenario here for Team J, we'll go back to the health dashboard to choose our next adventure.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So really quickly there, so that's really how we tease out those 3 personas for the schedule path. So this is exactly how we do this on the program in one of our business plan reviews, where we'll have a group of folks that's about half this size, potentially executives and folks that have skin in the game to deliver the airplane. And they'll get together around these to understand where they have to go pour some different decisions in, right? And so as we look at our ability to look out in the future, it really helps us. I mean, Tableau's really helped us to really get to the point where we can make some different decisions quickly. So when we go down that schedule road, right, that VP, that manager, the folks down below, they're all tied together with those data attributes, right? So it isn't my stuff, it's not your stuff, it's not my data, your data, my story, your story, it's our story at the program level. So that's how we have that meeting. We come right back to this page, and we're presented with 3 options, right? So we have schedule, we have Rio, and we have finance. We could go back into more schedule if we wanted to go look at Team B, but for the sake of our discussion here, we're gonna take a look at Rio, so risks, issues, and opportunities. And now we'll take a look at this and say, off to the right, you know, we see it's yellow. Yellow for us means it's a caution area, right? It's not red, which is, hey, we should probably take a deep look immediately. But we take a look at the fact that it's a yellow and it's a 7. One of the numbers that sticks out to me is the delinquencies, or 17 delinquencies. And a delinquency is any time that you promise to get something accomplished and you did not meet your commitments. So if I'm the VP on this program, I want to go take a look at those Rios to understand if there's anything out there of a technical or a schedule risk nature that might be impacting our ability to be successful. So we're going to take this opportunity now. Let's jump into Rio, and we'll go through how we actually use this to run the Rio portion of a BPR.
Yeah, so Paul brought up earlier this theme that we have with each of these dashboards. and really what that theme is being able to look at one data set and have folks from the VP senior level on down to the working level be able to use the same view. So the Rio dashboard is another great example of that. Rio at the Boeing company is risks, issues, and opportunities. So example of a risk could be a supplier that's not on contract, or a part that's not going to reach the factory on time to install it on the airplane. So what we have here is we've taken all of those scheduled risks, issues, and opportunities and built this first visual, which is the cumulative risk. This cumulative risk, as Paul mentioned in his intro, is really that wave of risk that we're carrying throughout the program. So this view is really good for the leadership team and first-line managers to be able to understand as we mature through the program, as we reach major milestones, to understand if we should be continuing on through the program or if we should hold open a major milestone based on the risk. On the right-hand side, we have each of the risks, issues, and opportunities broken down by team, so you can quickly see which team is attributing to that overall cumulative risk. And then across the middle here, we have those 17 delinquencies Paul was talking about. This gives a quick view to understand what stage of the risk each of those delinquencies are in. Is it a major issue for the program where we need to have a more in-depth conversation? As we can see, the majority of them are in green. Green means we're getting towards the end of that risk. Maybe it's not such a big issue this time around. And then lastly, we have a Gantt chart that's a visual depiction of each of those risks that attribute to that cumulative risk score. And what we're able to see here is how long each of those risks are taking and giving us a ultimate completion date for the final risk on the program.
Thanks, Sean. So if we continue down that team example path of running that meeting, we were on the front page and we saw that Team J and Team B were both poor performers of the month. And we look at, over here on the right, we can quickly see that Team B has by far the most accepted risk and issues on the program. So we could jump right to here from the health page with that same kind of schedule action, but we're already here, so we'll just filter for Team B, and see the same dashboard just in context of Team B. So this cumulative risk chart, when we accept risks, they have all these mitigation events. Very similar to the kind of schedule releases that we have, just it's a schedule of events that have to happen for that risk to close. But it's spread out over a long amount of time. And so we use a little bit of R to pad out the data and get a smooth flow of risk carrying over month, whatever task is currently open. And that's where you get more of a stack up and burn down of tasks over time. And get that sense of how much magnitude of risk we have, because each segment in this upper chart is a mitigation event. And they're not just counts, right? We use that level of risk, that green, yellow, red. They each have their own individual value of magnitude, and that's what determines the thickness of that segment. So you'll see even within yellows, there are different magnitudes, and that gives you more of a sense of that total heaviness of how much weight of risk we're carrying. If we look at Team B now, we see their stack up, and we're continuing through this example. We see that they're through their peak, right? Their peak was 3 months ago. They're on their down slope, hopefully to be burning off towards August of 2019. And so while they're carrying the most, they are in the right direction. They still have some red, some high-level events that need to close out. And if you wanted to see more about maybe this one Rio 1115, we allow them to click, and you actually see that individual Rio number highlighted throughout its flow. So it's actually only the second month this risk has been open, and it's closing out here at the beginning of 2019. And that's true for any risk here. You can just click throughout here and see that individual burn down of a risk, is what we call it, down to its closing state. And where this one has been red for quite some time, or open for quite some time, this is the last month, based on this today line, that this risk will be open. And they should be closing that out, and the stack will get a little bit smaller. We mentioned this is really just for context over here on the upper right. We see how many risks are open, how many opportunities, which are the good things, and issues that are open. You can get some quick information about just from highlighting of where a risk opened, what magnitude, that original high-level risk, where it is currently, in this case, a 3.3, and what its target is at, and that's likelihood and consequence on a risk cube. Moving down into the middle, these delinquent on ECDs, we really pull these out because it's a direct proponent of the risk score, that 1 through 10 score that we aggregate together with everything else to give that overall health. These are key. It shows maybe how much compression we have to our risk plans of things not completing and pushing, sliding these risks down, because they accept these plans given a certain closure date. And so if things aren't progressing to plan, leadership needs to know. And so I remember from looking at the front overall health page, there's 17 open for the program, and 10 of those happen to be for Team B, which adds to their big red bubble on the main screen. And you can get, again, quick information, maybe see where this risk lies in with the rest of the plan. As we scroll down, this is Team B's handling plan over time. And while it's similar to the chart up above, it's not as much about magnitude, but really spatially over time, and just that Gantt view of how things are progressing, because you do get a sense of how many risks are open right now, right? How many are stacked up on this current month. But what's more important about this chart is really how long these tasks are taking to complete. How long has this task been open, right? And that's that thickness of the Gantt bar. And seeing when their overall plan spatially is closing, right? And so we see that Team B should be out of the risk system at the end in July of 2019, which is well ahead of the program reference line here that we leave in for context of 12/7 of 2020, which is when everything should be closed for the -9, or for this sample project. So as we're done looking at Rio for this example, we'd head back to the overall health dashboard again to decide where we'll go from here.
Yeah, so we already gone down the schedule road. We just went down the Rio road. This is exactly how we would do it in a meeting, where we'd take a look at what are the things we need to pay attention to most on the program. We saw there that there were some things that we should make some immediate decisions on, probably, right? It presents it in a way that we can do that. We've got 3/4 of the delinquent ECDs for our risks are in that one team, right? So there's a focused conversation between the VP and the director of that team. What help is needed? Do you need some more folks over there to help actually get that achieved? Back to the main page again, right? We want to go right back to this. It's like a yo-yo, comes right back up. So we've taken a look at schedule and Rio. We're gonna take a look at finance. So finance for us on the surface looks green, right? Green is good. But this is the program level view, right? And so the program could be in great shape financially, but there could be one of the teams that maybe is struggling a little bit more or needs a little bit of help. Or you could have a team that maybe has an opportunity. So in the same meeting, we would then go into finance to understand what is really making up that 94% of spending to forecast. So let's go take a look at that.
Yeah, so the third and final pillar of data that we look at and helps build up that aggregate health score is finance. In finance, what's building up that score and what we're looking at here is financial estimations versus actuals. And so all of the sand, it's broken down by all of the teams, and that is their baseline estimated plan for this program. So you can see we're on the downswing of the program, we're getting towards the end of it. The actuals is that line, so we can see month over month, week over week, how each of these teams at a program level are charging. In that line, going up to the 94 that we were just looking at on the front page are those actuals. We're then, based on calculations, able to get projection for the next 3 months that gives the program an idea of where they're trending as far as charging goes. Looking at the upper sand chart, the actuals versus estimates, we can see that we are undercharging as a program. 94, it feels like we're doing pretty well. We're saving money, but really that's not the case when we look down at the individual teams. So down below, each of those same projections is broken down by team. And we can see that based on color, red, yellow, green again, that some of those teams have been overcharging for the past couple of months, and we're projecting them to overcharge out into the future again. So this is a great conversation piece for those leaders to understand if resources are aligned correctly on the program, if one team can maybe benefit from some shared resources from another team that is undercharging.
Thanks, Sean. So now that we're continuing down this team example, right, we looked at the main health page. We know that we're performing well for the month as a program, but we want to know how every team is doing. That's why Sean mentioned we have them broken out right here. And if we look, these are the individual headcount forecasts and actuals for each of the months for Team J. So we look 3 months in the past, just quickly down here in the summary below, give the current month and the future month. So if we look at Team J, we see that they're at 138% of their forecast in July, and they've been over for some time, even though they had a good month in June. They're back up and they're projected out. So let's continue to use one of our 2 red bubble teams here and filter for Team J, and we'll look at their overall profile, right? So the upper chart now is filtered for just Team J, and we see their individual headcount forecast profile and how their actuals have compared to it. And we see that they were doing great, right? They were right at on target each of the months for most of 2017, but then they started to veer off. And we see that they came back down like we saw, we could see down below, but they're now at 138% this month, and that they're going out in the wrong direction, our projection. And what we do there is instead of just drawing a trend line or finding the trend line of the actuals, headcount, when we talk about headcount, the forecast or the outlook can change dramatically month over month and have those steep declines. So we really just find their performance to their headcount as a percentage or a function of it and apply it out in the future. And so we see really how they're performing to forecast, not the number of heads they should have that month. And so we've looked at it here, and you know, it's a nice little chart, but again, we use parameters because our finance data has a lot of different slicers as well. And so instead of making the user push out to another view or stacking even more charts that are really the same thing all on one dashboard, we use parameters to allow them to slice and dice it a little bit more, and we'll choose maybe OT and regular because we know we're 138%, but really what's making that up? And we see what their forecast is for OT and regular here, OT overtime or OT being the blue and regular headcount being the big chunk, the orange. What's nice is quickly down below, that same breakout is done with that same parameter. And so we can see that they're 126% of their forecast in regular time or heads, but they're 362% of that same forecast or their OT forecast in the month of July. So that's probably where the discussion would start heading. And do they need help? Are there risks open? And that's really more how that interplay happens, right? Is this driving lateness in the schedule, or is it due to being late in the schedule that we viewed earlier? So now that we've reviewed finance as a team level, we'd head back to the overall health page probably in one of these meetings to really sum it up and have leadership kind of give the next direction.
Yeah, so it's good. Thanks, Richie and Sean. So this is exactly how we would do this in a meeting, right? So we just went down, we took a look at finance, having looked at schedule, having looked at Rio, we took a look at finance, understand how we're spending money and are we doing it the right way. So we come right back up to this page, and then we could have any more closing conversations from here. But this is really where we start to, close out and start to think about how are we doing the things that we need to do so that we can drive those insights, right? People use the word insight all the time now. It felt like 5 years ago nobody used it, but today it's like everyone says insight every third word, right? But this is really where we're able to do things now where our VPs, our managers, and the folks on the floor can actually make decisions that they couldn't have made 5 years ago. They couldn't even have made a year ago. And so I would also just want to add to this is that the things we're looking at here really, no one asked us to build any of these pieces. These are things that the three of us sat down and we drew on whiteboards and we thought, could we do this? So when we go back to the kind of the example of the black and white city and the fact that it was kind of disaggregated, that was actually really what it was. And it was our team coming in to say, hey, can we do a better job of doing this for our VP and for our program? So I look at that black and white thing, and my favorite analogy for analytics is always the Wizard of Oz. So if anyone hasn't seen the Wizard of Oz, you're probably the only one, but it's the Wizard of Oz. So when we go take a look at that black and white city, I always like to think about Dorothy. And the movie opens up with black and white, and it's this sepia-toned Kansas, and everybody's mean to her, right? Except for a dog. But, it's this black and white sepia tone, and then, of course, it opens up into this land of full color. So we really want to do the same thing for you here, where you say, there's this black and white world where we have these old standards and some of these old institutionalized, modes of thinking. Tableau allows us to go out there and actually present the world in full color. Once we've been able to present the world in full color, our leaders really latched on. And kind of like Dorothy, I don't think she ever went back. Did she ever go back to black and white? No, she went back and it was full color in Kansas. So I haven't seen it since I was a kid. So. But just like Dorothy, right? It went from black and white to full color, never wanted to go back to black and white. Same thing for the airplane program. We started out in black and white. Using Tableau, we've gotten to full color. So that's really what we had to present for you today. So we've got some time for questions I typically answer the why questions, and these guys answer the guys who actually do the work questions. So, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Sure. Question was, how do we break down the barriers for culture? I still think that relationships are probably the number one piece of every business, this not being anything different from that. We need to let people know that we're going to take care of their data, right? There's a real reach that happens where I ask you, hey, can I see your data so I can blend it with mine? I don't know, why do you need my data? I'm not going to give you access to that. That's really the first cultural hurdle that we had to get through, is just building that relationship and establishing that trust to say, hey, it's okay. We're going to use your data responsibly. We're not going to do anything that you don't want. We're not going to publish it on the server without you knowing about it. And then when we do that, we sit down with them and make sure that they're comfortable with what we've got to present, and then they're bought into it. Without doing that, right, they're not going to ever agree that what we're presenting is actually their data. They're going to say, I didn't buy off on that. And that's also going to drive adoption down the drain, which anyone who ever does this business knows the easiest thing you can do is put something on server. The hardest thing you can do is get people to actually use it. So that helps us.
I would add to that too, that while he mentioned this kind of a grassroots effort, right? We just drew this up on a whiteboard. We had very good leadership buy-in, right? From the very beginning, we have some great forward-thinking leaders on our development program that really drive it from the top down too, so we're fortunate in that way.
Yeah, that also helps, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. One more time, sorry. The question was, how long did it take for the leaders to change into that thinking?
Still going.
It really wasn't that long. So we actually, I mean, these guys thought it was a long time. I actually thought it was pretty fast. What we had to do was we had to take the data and build some prototypes. And we went and sat down with our vice president and we said, hey, this is what we think we can go do. We can production harden this. It was pretty fast from there, and then it became a real iterative cycle where we were doing quite a bit, and we were in a lot of change management from that perspective. For these guys, it took a long time because they had to actually do the work. I just had to draw something on a whiteboard once and then go to some meetings, so it was pretty good for me. But yeah, go ahead.
Did you have to modify the way that necessary inputted the data, or were you able to blend with existing data?
Excellent question. We have to do both. So we're presented with a lot of problems. For this particular example, we just had to aggregate the data. We have projects that we do in multiple spaces where oftentimes we find out we have no data. And that's a conversation where we have to go change business processes so that we can get data collection. Sometimes folks don't want to do that, or sometimes there's no method for data collection. So we have another part of our team that'll go out and build databases where we have to actually create the place where we want them to put the data so we can continue our projects. So it's a little bit of both, sometimes the latter, but we figure we have to do that if we want a project to move. So.
Yeah, I think just adding on that project there and a lot of the projects we do do a little bit of shaping. But yeah, it's a lot of working with the DBAs and utilizing Tableau's tools. I think we
Yes.
had one
You
right
have-
over
you have a
here.
question?
Yeah, you've been
Oh.
hanging your hand up
Go
for
at
a
the same
while.
time, maybe kind of
You
weird.
gotta look over here, Paul.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. This was my side of the room.
Yeah.
Sorry. These were the friendly people that I started out with.
So with all of the data silos that you have within the different businesses and within different businesses, how did you bring those together? Was that within a data warehouse, or were you able to bring them into Tableau?
Yeah, so we, at the Boeing company, there are common data warehouses, some common data warehouses more that are popping up. But yeah, we would do our best to utilize where data connections are today, but then also utilizing our own SQL servers or that sort of thing to blend data as much as we could. Some of it does take place in Tableau where we can't establish a connection outside of it, but yeah, using SPSS, those sort of things
Yeah.
have helped.
Try to do as much as possible
Yeah.
upstream. You had a question? Sorry, I'm going to go to the side of the room again. But, yeah.
How often do you refresh your data from day to day?
Oh, okay. Good question. Well, these tools are actually updated every morning about 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah, it's morning, overnight.
Yeah, so every day this goes out and it hits a data set, looks for delta. So that's something we probably could have talked about a little differently, but traditionally this meeting would be held once a week. Every Tuesday, the program gets together, and from Wednesday until Monday, they're scrubbing decks and trying to make this perfect story to talk about how they're doing. We do it every day now. Yes. Yeah, so instead of having one meeting a week with insights, now this is persistent, so they can do it whenever they actually pull the data up. It's as fresh as it should be. So that's good. Sorry. Go ahead, Sean. You had.
Get it. Who?
You spoke about the duration of time within Boeing. Wait, you did distracted work the way that you're doing it now. That was
Yeah, so the question was, based on the way that Boeing used to do analysis and look at data and how we do it now, has been that cost effective? Certainly, I don't think we can get into the details or necessarily know the details today. But yeah, just the cost savings from being able to turn that chart generation time into chart analysis time at the analyst level, at the leadership level, has saved considerably.
Yeah, I mean, there's that piece. There's the piece of we have engineers and managers from all different facets of the business looking at the exact same data set to come up with conclusions, as opposed to what we traditionally do is everyone has their own version of the spreadsheet, right? Well, I've got my spreadsheet, it's different from your spreadsheet. So we've got the chart creation time as well as people coming together, kind of like a data lake, right? They're coming around and they're like, this is the single source of truth. And so we really distill some of those wasted conversations we typically would have. A lot of benefit there.
I'll pick one. You had your hand up for a while.
Thanks for checking us back.
Yeah.
So your dashboards were built for a weekly kind of a date line, and they have a fair amount of interactivity in it. How did you roll out the training to get people to understand how to use the tool? Because we kind of struggle with that.
Yeah,
It can, right? I mean, that's interesting, right? We have this single tool that's, like you mentioned, a weekly high-level meeting, but give the details right down there. So there is some performance issues from time to time that you kind of got to give back or accept, I guess. But for the most part, they've come to understand, as they both mentioned just in the last answer, that the chart generation, we're reducing hours and hours and hours of chart generation, so they come to accept a 15-second or 10-second load time. But to the training part of it, it was because, like he mentioned, no one really asked us to do this, it was us. And so we had to build these, a user guide to the best I could and really try and give that layman's guide to analytics or a chart and hold meetings. And then we held open office hours for quite some time for anyone to pop in. We just had this set time a couple times a week, maybe an hour in a room that they could pop in and ask questions here and there.
I would add one thing specifically to that. I think maybe it's addressing your question. We work with some folks, this is a little differently than Richie. We work with some folks to build a script of how to use the tools, because it really is a choose your own adventure. And when you get 100 people trying to choose your own adventure, you get 100 adventures, right? And that's a lousy movie. So we scripted it to say, this is how we would want to carry the conversation through the data, and worked with leaders to start out at a certain level and then keep moving through it that way. That was probably one of the hardest parts for us, was getting the script on paper and getting people to adhere to it, because they tend to squirrel a little bit, right? And everybody wants to go tease down a different data path, and it's really hard to keep 100 people from doing that with this. So I don't know if that addressed some of what you asked, but I would say if you're going to ever do something like this, heavy scripting is recommended.
We got this guy down here.
Yeah, I was curious, you mentioned you have to predict out behavior or the schedule, and you mentioned SPS, or I'm just wondering a little bit about, it sounds like, that's done upstream and then flows into Tableau?
Yes, we try and do as much processing in SPSS and in R prior to pulling it into Tableau. We have running servers that will run those processes overnight. We were talking about how this tool that we were looking at updates every morning at like 3:30. We have those processes, other processes running prior to that, and that's part of the reason we don't do it at midnight. The data warehouses have to update, then we have to do our processing, then Tableau needs to update.
Well, there's something else to think about too. When you're presenting something to somebody in Tableau, and if you build it incorrectly and it's slow, they don't see that these guys are slow. They think Tableau is slow. So I'm not going to be able to sell them the next tool that comes down the pipeline either, because they've already been indoctrinated with the fact that these things are all slow. So we package as much of it as we can upstream so that when they use it, it's crisp. If we didn't do that, we'd basically be hurting our future market. So.
And then are you refreshing your predictive models and things like that at the same time every night, or is that happening in a different cadence?
We typically stage them at different times, whenever it becomes appropriate. Some things are actually weekly. A lot of our finance pieces are weekly because that's our reporting cycle. So some of the finance pieces, they don't need to be updated all the time. So it's really data specific. We don't set a hard and fast line that every day at 3 a.m. we're going to go cripple the databases. So, yeah. Well, there's a lot over here. There's a lot on this side, so you guys
get
can
back
ignore it
over
now.
there.
Go ahead. Laptops, so we consume a lot of things on laptop. These tools don't translate to mobile very well just because mobile's so small and there's a lot going on. Laptops, mobile, we have rooms outfitted with touch panels. A lot of what we do here where we run with multiple projectors. Typically we try to get as much of it in front of people as possible so that they can kind of use it in a group setting like they're watching a movie. But yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead. No, so we still, the question was, can everyone inside Boeing use the dashboard? Boeing really has three major business units: commercial, which we're in, defense, and then we also have global services. Our team does predominantly work in commercial. The tools you've seen here, we're actually merging over into defense, and we're helping our defense programs come up with some of these newer versions of these tools. But those two groups never can see each other's work. Just
We have
because of contracts.
access control
Yeah.
policies set up for each of our projects on our server, and then manage that as server admins for our location.
Yeah. Go ahead. So the question was, if a team uploaded status
Yeah.
that looked good, but it really wasn't good?
Let me answer this, right? I think this actually prevents that, at least in my opinion, because the old way of doing this was preparing this stale or flat deck, a PowerPoint deck, that really told whatever story they wanted at the end of the week, and if they felt yellow or not, or I kind of feel green, but I probably should be yellow. Whereas we work to create this objective scoring system that is directly in the data sources, that schedule system, that finance system, there's really not an easy way for them to fake that. I won't say never, right? But that's what they use to build the airplane, so it's not very beneficial for them to type in anything that shouldn't be there. Not nearly as easy as it was to tell the story that they wanted to tell in a PowerPoint deck. This makes them explain the story that's really happening based on the data.
Yeah, so it's all just fed from the underlying systems as opposed to, you try to craft your own message. So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, the color of money cut up in the
I couldn't
Gantt
hear.
chart.
Yeah, one of those other parameters, I think we went through OT versus regular, overtime versus regular, but yeah, we have many more attributes that we run through. Also, with regards to finance, not even everybody on the program can see all of the financial information. So some of the financial metrics that go into more detail are contained within the finance team.
Yeah, we cut finance by a number of different slicers, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, but different colors of money, so yeah. Yep, go for it.
All right.
So
Yeah,
it's-
so all of that,
open plan.
all of that schedule information is housed in a common data warehouse, so it's not individual project files or individual Excel files where they're tracking at a lower level. I'm not sure if that answers your
There's
question, but
some front-end interfaces that engineers can go in to enter information themselves.
I think, are you asking, do we use Microsoft Project Server?
mm,
No, he's asking that. No, it's Open
Oh,
Plan.
Open Plan Professional.
Yeah, it's
for the
all Open
scheduling
Plan Professional.
information.
Yeah, it's not a Microsoft
Got
Server setup.
Citrix.
Yeah.
mhm.
It's a whole-
He's first, I gotta tell you, sorry. He's faster.
He's on
Yeah,
it.
go ahead.
It was
Yeah.
all fun.
The top 2 pain points in the, along the journey?
Yeah, I'd say top 2 pain points is that culture side,
Yeah.
being able to, get the entire program or get a team to adopt what we're trying to do in Tableau and get out of their way of, well, I only look at, one data set and only my team should care about that data set. And then the other would be
Accuracy.
Yeah,
I would say accuracy, because to feed adoption, if you push something out that isn't right, it kills it immediately, right? I don't trust Tableau, that's not right.
Yeah,
you
so
know?
that's the trick. That was one of the bigger pieces for us was, well, it's the Tableau data. Now that we're seeing
Right.
the Tableau data, it's like, this isn't the Tableau data, this is the data you've been creating for the last year. We're just visualizing it in Tableau. And once we presented this, they're like, oh, where's this Tableau data come from? It's like, well, it's the same thing you've been working with for the last year in Excel, it's just now it looks pretty, right? And so getting people to get over that hurdle. Plus, I would say when the more data pieces that we put together, I mean, we're adding more and more things into this now to tell, I mean, that's like 3 buildings and there's an entire city. If one of those data sources fails, it could change the complexity of what we're looking at a little bit. And so just the larger we get, scaling that up so that it'll actually continue to work at scale is gonna be I think that's really gonna be our next challenge. as we add more pieces to it. So. Yeah. Go for it.
It's 3 main ones, but there's a couple different models of them, I guess. So there's 4, 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's 4 main federated systems that we pull in.
We kind of package maybe Rio in one way for that model, and then package Rio in a different way, but same source, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. He's been trying for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, related to that.
Yeah.
Your top line numbers, your top line scores,
Okay.
are they all purely mathematical, or is there some weighted averaging going on there? And secondly,
Yeah.
is it possible to get a negative score, just sort of beyond the idea?
Not possible to get negative. It should. But there's some weighting within the 3 scores. So for Rio, for instance, because we don't want to penalize people for identifying risk, we want to identify risk. We want to show it's an average. So it's the weight of the risk on average you're carrying, the average days off you are, your average your on-time performance is an average, right? And so it is weighted in that little bit, but there's not weighting between the 3 categories. They didn't want to do that. They specifically wanted a 1 through 10 for each of the 3 big pillars. But that did take a long time of back and forth and iterating the scoring system with the leadership. That was one of the big things from the beginning to get
Well,
them
one
to
of the
accept
things we
it.
did with that too was we took it off here for what we're going to show you guys, but there's a button that we put right there on that dashboard that has that health score breakdown.
Yeah.
And so if anyone questions what we're looking at, we could click on that. It pops up a separate worksheet that goes through all of the calcs, all of the data sources, what we're doing with them, so they can go, oh, okay, I'm grounded again. So we put that in there, so if anybody ever brought up the question, well, I don't really know if I trust that, we could go right to it right there off the page. So, yeah, go ahead.
Less now. So it did a little bit at first, right? And now it's really just when maybe credentials change, right? Because we, embed them in there, and that happened today while I'm at the conference, right? And so I have to update the credentials on server, but no. So you could still get, the fortunate thing is, right, there's still other interfaces that they can find the information. It just wouldn't, it'd be yesterday's data, right? But what's nice about that is it's pretty, for as many users as it has, it's pretty minimal upkeep. I mean, we are the team in general, and it doesn't take I can still go make new stuff and still handle it pretty easily.
So I think
I
maybe
mean, I should get paid more, but.
time for one more.
How long does it take you to design everything?
Yeah,
How long did
that's-
it take to
that's a-
design everything?
That's a good question. Like Richie was saying, it's an iterative process, right? It's working closely with that leadership team. That leadership team has a idea of what they would like to see as more folks come on the program, more ideas come onto the program, and the visualization will change. So it's just like a program is evolutionary and has different phases that it goes through. Our tools have different phases that they go through as well.
Few months.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would
I'll
say a
close
few
it out.
months to a really stable spot where I don't really change a whole lot. They do a lot of requests of new things built off of that, which is cool.
Yeah.
I would say the initial part of it, though, the schedule page where you see that master phasing plan with the bubbles that pulse around, I drew that on a whiteboard 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, and having come from a Tableau team that I led years ago and then went into a different space where we didn't have Tableau anymore, we were doing strict program management, scheduling, and project management. I saw the need for doing that, and I drew it on the board. Well, I mean, Richard here, Richard was one of the folks I talked to in front of you, sorry. Richard, raise your hand so people know I'm not pointing at a blank chair. But we drew that I drew it on the board 3 years ago, and it took, 2 years to get some folks who could actually sit down with me and we could actually make it a reality. So in all essence, it took almost 3 years to get it to market.
Well, I wasn't in the room when you drew that on the
Yeah, see, if he was in the room, it would have taken much longer. But sometimes, it's that concept. It was on a whiteboard. It's still on the whiteboard today. It's gone through some iterations from there, but about 3 years. So, One more.
Thank
I,
you.
I think we're going to get the hook because they.
You did.
More. What do we? I would just say basic marketing. Market. I mean market. So I don't know how many times do we do? We probably do one of these presentations at Boeing once or twice a week, where we go on through the actual data and meeting with a different group to talk about it. So I would say it's mostly just marketing. Making sure that if you're doing things, you're always iterating and making them better, and as you make them better, you're sharing that you're making it better, right? Unlike New Coke, which was not better, we make things new, and then we hopefully, drive adoption through share. Yeah. Thank you, guys.